The Philippines called the U.S. military to attack China in South China Sea. Manila will invoke its defense agreement with the United States if China attacks its naval vessels in the South China Sea. Philippine Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said on Wednesday. His comments mark the first time the Rodrigo Duterte administration has openly declared it would turn to Washington for help, amid ongoing flare-ups between Manila and Beijing in the disputed waters. Locsin, who appeared on the ANC News Channel's morning talk show, said Manila would continue air patrols over the South China Sea despite Beijing's calls to halt what it described as illegal provocations. They can call it illegal provocations, you can't change their minds. They already lost the arbitral award, referring to the 2016 decision by an international tribunal that ruled against most of Beijing's expansive claims to the South China Sea. But if something happens that is beyond incursion but is in fact an attack on, say, a Filipino naval vessel, that means then I call up Washington, D.C. Pressed by presenter Karen Davila on the circumstances that would make Manila make the call to the U.S., he refused to go into specifics, saying, "I will not discuss that because the essence of deterrence theory is uncertainty." Locsin had earlier this month spoken to the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, after Washington rejected China's claims to the resource-rich disputed waterway through which $3 trillion of trade passes, and said the U.S. would support countries who believe Beijing had violated their own claims. Beijing has often relied on its 9-line map to claim historic rights over the sea, which has been challenged by the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan and Brunei. Pompeo had spoken to a host of foreign ministers from the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, bloc, including Locsin, with a State Department note on the call saying both men discussed the recent change in the U.S. policy on maritime claims in the South China Sea, the U.S. support for Southeast Asian coastal states and opportunities for further the U.S.-Philippine maritime cooperation. In the ANC interview, Locsin did not want to elaborate on the discussion but said, "I was talking to the Secretary of State and these are things that are not yet ripe for revelation." Asked to comment on Locsin's remarks, Aaron Jedrabena, a research fellow at the foreign policy think tank Asia-Pacific Pathways to Progress, said Beijing might perceive it as a sign of continuing strategic alignment between Manila and Washington. Bena said that when Pompeo visited the Philippines in March 2019, Pompeo had said that if China initiates an armed attack on any member of the Philippine Armed Force or public vessel or aircraft in the South China Sea, the Mutual Defense Treaty will be activated. The analyst said the Philippines was just more assertive in safeguarding the country's sovereign rights and interests because the government feels that it needs to respond to the actions of the Chinese side. Since 1951, the U.S. and Philippines have had a mutual defense treaty that commits them to supporting each other in the event either is attacked. Under the previous U.S. President, Barack Obama, the U.S. backed away from a concrete commitment to apply the treaty to the Philippines' maritime territorial disputes with China. Locsin said the Obama administration, Democratic administrations tend to be appeasing and it had bowed down to China, which is why we lost the reefs. He was referring to the Scarborough Shoal that China has occupied since 2012 after a standoff with Manila. The shoal, 240 kilometers west of the Philippines' Luzon and 650 kilometers from China's Hainan province, is one of the region's richest fishing grounds. Locsin said, The Republican administrations have always been very firm about American commitment to freedom and independence of nations. He said the Trump administration had pivoted to Asia to assert fundamental things: freedom of navigation, independence and sovereignty of states, guarantees against aggression to preserve a country's freedom. For the past few months, Manila's language, like her voice in its territorial dispute with Beijing, has become increasingly strident and assertive. A senior government official who asked not to be identified said it's part of a recalibration of foreign policy. To make it more independent and assertive of our national sovereignty and sovereign rights, the overall thrust is still the same: to maintain friendly and cooperative relations with China, but at the same time to push back whenever there are incidents involving issues of Philippine sovereignty. Said it was a case of sending a clear message and drawing a line in the waters. The Mutual Defense Treaty can be invoked if a Philippine vessel is attacked or if maritime features we control are occupied by force. This, he added, included the Philippine landing craft deliberately grounded and garrisoned by a dozen men on the Second Thomas Shoal. It happened last week when the Philippine Foreign Ministry filed a diplomatic protest, its 57th, over what it said was China's illegal confiscation of Filipino fishing equipment near Scarborough Shoal. In Manila's protest, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian last week said China's patrols in the South China Sea were beyond reproach and air patrols by the Philippines infringed on its sovereignty. He defended activities by the Chinese Coast Guard and urged the Philippines to immediately stop illegal provocations.